When was the last time you took care of your belongings? It could be something as mundane as washing your bed sheets or regularly doing the dishes. Either way, the methodologies in mind are practiced as a way to maintain health and longevity of said belongings, and by extension, us. Simply put, you take care of it, and it will take care of you. Such is my mindset now. Long after the incident at the Yakura residence, that day changed my life forever. We initially thought it was going to be a simple welfare check. The person in question, Sumarusko Yokura, was a bit of a hoarder. But that aside, last checked, he was mostly in good health, all things considered. That day, things seemed different. One of the few neighbors he talked to hadn't seen him in a few days. His house had been quiet and had seen nobody enter or leave. After gleaming what we could from the neighbors, Officer Suwari and myself moved on to the residence in question. The house was situated in a modest area outside Tokyo. Mr. Yokura himself was a retired lawyer, so it's anyone's guess how he could afford the nice house. We politely knocked on the front door, but there was no response. A minute later, we knocked again, this time more loudly, but still nothing. Thanks to the neighbor who told us of the spare key under the doormat, we managed to gain entry. The inside was quite run down, a far cry from the outside's modest appearance. We called out, but the house was silent. You could hear a pin drop. My partner elected to search the ground floor, so hence I went upstairs. The steps creaked under my weight, but paying it no heed, I reached the top, then made my way towards the master bedroom. What I would find in there would be the initial tipping point for this whole mess. I called my partner to join me. Once he arrived, we entered the bedroom. In short, we found Mr. Yokura, but unfortunately he was deceased. But what actually happened was beyond us. His body appeared as if it had been flattened or crushed by something. A mess of flesh and bone lying in the middle of the floor, amidst the furnishings stained with blood. Of the grisly scene, we had little to say. I left my partner to stand watch while I went to radio the station. Soon the scene was crawling with paramedics and more officers, and afterwards we were filling out our reports. Long after we parted ways, I was at home, on my back porch with the smoke. At the time, it was just another day. A poor soul fell victim to some killer, and we were left to put together the puzzle that was left behind. I took another drag off my smoke and went inside for the night. The following morning, I would receive news that my partner had gone missing. When I reached the station, I would learn his squad car was found, but he wasn't. He had been picked to keep an eye on the Yokura house. His car was outside as if he had just left it there, but he was nowhere to be seen. Several nights would pass and there would be no contact, not with friends, family, or anyone. Officer Isuwari and myself had been partners for a few years before he disappeared. I had known him well, a determined and focused person, rarely drank, only on occasion. Take all of this into account, and you can see why most people thought it odd that Isuwari would just up and vanish. Rumors were flying around the station, as usual. Some people suspected that his disappearance may have had something to do with the Yokura murder, but it was only speculation. I paid my respects to his loved ones. Time continued on, and what questions anyone may have had remained unanswered. Back to the Yokura residence. It was cleaned out, and whatever wasn't auctioned off was tossed in a junkyard. Eventually, the house was renovated and was back on the market as a Jiko Buken. The case of the murder itself, if at the time we could even call it that, was running cold, as few to no suspects ever turned up. Mr. Yukura had good relationships with everyone he knew, hence rivals were few and far between. It could have been modestly easier to just sweep it under the rug if the same case hadn't involved a missing officer. People at the top must have thought otherwise, so the case went cold. It wouldn't be till much later that another incident would occur. A man by the name of Onra Zakeshi, an average office worker, went silent after returning home from work one night. It would be over a month as contact with family and friends slowly deteriorated. He later would be found in his fourth-floor apartment, a mangled mess not unlike Mr. Yukura. There I stood, in another person's residence, trying to make heads or tails of a puddle of what used to be a human. The bedroom was absolutely grotty, a mess of bloodstains and overturned furniture. It was another major outlier. Just like the Yukura estate, Zakeshi's place was run down and unkept. The remains were found in the master bedroom, hence the similarities. We chalked it up to ritualistic killings. There was a psycho on the loose. It was as simple as that. Of course, it was the best we could tell the public. To sum up the two cases, we had two incidents we're calling homicides. But that's because we didn't know what else to call them. I'd come into a house, nobody around, and find nothing of the owner but a splatter of blood and sinew. What else am I supposed to think? People started to talk. There were whispers that it was a cult, as if Japan hadn't had their fair share of those already. However, if it is a cult, then that is 2 lives they've claimed, 3 if we count my partner. I tried to speculate, but there were too many variables. Is this the same cult from the terror attack? Is it a new organization? If so, why did they kill those people? Were they connected? Were they targets? Why? There was this nice soup place down near my apartment. An old woman, Mrs. Matsuwa. It was her place. The afternoon was rainy. It fell in buckets, each drop slamming against the pavement behind me. I sat on a stool hunched over the counter, the bleak of the storm on one side and the warmth of the shop upon my face. She came over and jokingly scolded me for letting my food sit. I casually shrugged it off and replied that work was just a little more stressful than usual. She knew I had lost my partner, but that was just a small piece. Things seemed more complicated than I cared to admit. She went on to mention the homicides and the horrific states the victims had been found in. Without making eye contact, I nodded in confirmation. I then added that, as of then, there had been no suspects. I then forced myself to get started on my soup. Mrs. Matsuwa just sat there by me and waited patiently. I took a whole spoonful, calmly swallowed it, then threw up my hands in defeat. I was lost, and I admitted it. She was about to say something, but her attention was taken away when her father, an old man seated in the back room, made a noise. She turned to see him, his arm outstretched silently pointing at the TV. She politely excused herself and left me to finish off my soup. As I ate, I could hear the rough, grainy sound of a CRT tuned to the evening news right before Mrs. Matsuwa switched it off. After I finished, I left. The warmth disappeared behind me. The bleakness smothered me. The dark alleys lit only by the dim lamps that flanked me on either side. My walk back was undisturbed, but I may not have slept as well as I had wanted. Another month passed, and we would end up finding a third victim. One late night, I and another officer arrived at the home of one Nobu Akihara, a simple restaurant worker. She worked tables at a sushi place in the city. By this point, the deathly smell and the look of the downtrodden interior no longer had an effect on me. I carefully walked over the pieces of broken wood and dirt-splashed floor. I led my new partner up the stairs, where I presumed we'd find the body. We reached the main bedroom, and that's where we found Miss Akiara's remains. As we were looking over the scene, I noticed something. A large red dress cabinet. I never noticed it at the first one, really. I lightly noticed it when we found the second victim, but after a third, it hit me. Towering over the remains at the head of the room was a tall red dress cabinet. It looked very old, with 2 large swinging doors and 4 lower drawers below those. I was taken back. It was so mundane, but I had never noticed until the third victim. I turned to see my partner leave the room to radio the station. I followed him, although we wouldn't make it very far. We both just stood at the top of the stairs. His radio was malfunctioning. We couldn't get a hold of anyone. He opted to go and use the radio in the squad car, and I decided to wait inside. After I was alone, however, the feeling within the house changed dramatically. The air seemed to quickly slink away, akin to an animal's behavior when they sense a nearby predator. Every space felt cold. Windows that were open allowed no air, and every creak of the walls and floorboards was as if the house groaned from old age and straining bones. I suddenly felt anxious, as if I was being watched. The house settled again. This time it was louder. Everything then fell silent. A silence so loud its very weight could throw down a whole forest. It was broken when my partner came back. He notified me that he made contact and backup would be there soon. I breathed a sigh of relief. I turned away just for a moment to adjust my uniform. But in a breath, my attention was grabbed. A series of loud sounds, then something long whipped through the wall, nearly taking us out. I fell into the room next to me. My partner fell down the stairs. Thankfully, he was okay. I drew my service pistol and slowly came out into the hallway. My partner carefully came up the stairs, his service weapon also drawn and ready. The hallway in front of us was now ripped completely on one side, and directly down the hall from us, to our horror, we watched a long, red, ichor-laden tongue slowly slither back into a large, red dress cabinet. We then heard the creaking of wood, and then we watched as the cabinet seemed to stretch and slowly make itself bigger. The outer surface of red-stained wood snapped in splinters, revealing what looked like a pink flesh pulsating underneath. As it grew in size, the middle opened up horizontally to a dark maw of sharp teeth and a lash-like tongue. Lastly, at the top rested a large eye, which then fixed its soulless gaze upon us. Likely out of fear or bravery, we opened fire with our service pistols. Our bullets slammed into it, but they seemed to be ineffective. In response, it whipped its tongue at us again. We dove to get out of its way as more sections of the house were torn through. We ran back down the stairs and straight out the front door. Behind us, the tongue thrashed about. More and more of the house was ripped apart. We both managed to make it outside, but we were reluctant to discover a bit of a crowd had gathered. Through trying to catch his breath, my partner pleaded with them to leave the area. I immediately lied and said there was a large animal inside the house, and we suspected it was rabid. It was the best I could come up with, in spite of the house now being heavily damaged. There was more crashing, and then the tongue struck from within the house and grabbed a bystander. They were taken back inside screaming. Those who were still present to witness it fled in panic. We fled with them. We ended up running into the backup we had requested. Given the circumstances, all we could say is that we encountered some sort of creature, and it already claimed a bystander. They asked us if we knew what kind of creature, and I only replied something big. They would go on to cordon off the area until it was cleared. When we eventually decided to go back inside, much to our dismay, we would find it was gone. The only thing that remained was, what we concluded, was the body of the person who had been taken moments before, mashed, chewed, and torn, just like the previous victims. Both I and my partner agreed that we'd never tell anyone what we saw. The official report would go on to state an unknown animal of large size managed to break into a person's house, kill the owner, and trash their house. Local police are on the lookout for a dangerous animal, presumed to be rabid. I would finally find myself at Mrs. Matsua's soup house again, only this time the rain was accompanied by thunder and wind. In spite of this, the heat from the lamps Mrs. Matsua kept around were enough to balance out the storm right over my shoulder, but it paled in comparison to the whirlwind happening inside my head. Not in the name of all that is holy did I know what we saw. I am not even sure if I actually saw it myself. I just stared at my soup with an absent appetite. Mrs. Matsua was distracted, talking on the phone. I looked up from my soup and noticed her father seated in the back room as always, staring at me. Without a word, he slowly raised his arm and tiredly motioned me over. I went over and knelt down beside him. He would grab my arm suddenly and pulled me closer. He then spoke, softly, one word. Tsukumogami. I would sit there and listen to the story behind what attacked us. Its name was Kufuku. That is the name the old man and his associates would give it. It was not a he or she. It was barely an it. It was pure evil, and for anyone to believe anything different walked a fool's path. It was simply a dress cabinet, but one that had been present during and witness to many a heinous act. On the eve of his 100th birthday, the owner, at the time, in a fit of rage, murdered his wife and 2 kids. He would dismember the bodies and stuff the pieces inside the cabinet. Finally, as a last act, he placed a barrel inside his mouth and finished himself off at the cabinet's feet. It has no heart, other than from those it has killed. It knows not reason nor mercy, for it has never even comprehended such things. There is no plan nor complex motive for its horrid deeds, for it knows not what motive or plan is. It only knows to kill, to feed. It is something deeper than instinct, something more fouler than foul. Some may say that if it was born from man's misdeeds, then it is surely a punishment for our sins, or at least an unfortunate result that may have no problem with punishing us for creating it. Hey everybody, it's your good friend the Musical Pumpkin, back from watching over your pumpkin patch. Episode 20, we finally did it. Season 1 of Fractured Stories is finally finished, and now we can move on to Season 2. I'm so sorry that this took so long to get out. I had been torn between school, work, and getting stuff set up for the channel and all this other stuff, and also life getting in the way. And the fact that we're even able to get it out at all, I think, is a miracle in and of itself. So, I'm just gonna say it's pretty chill and we're good where we're at. It's gonna be a while before things begin progressing, like into the drawn scenes and maybe even animated scenes. So I think we're just gonna be here for a while, because here works, here fits, here everything is fine, and I simply do not have the ability, unfortunately, to progress that yet. For now, everything will be just fine. We're gonna do way more Fractured Stories. I have a second project coming out right now that a trailer will be dropping for soon. Basically, more story stuff. that's going to be running alongside Fractured Stories, so we'll have 2 series going on. And, there's going to be a little bit of a mystery for our 2 ongoing projects right now, Fractured Stories and the other thingy coming out. There's going to be a little story in and of itself between them. Who knows? Gosh, I wonder what that means. Anyways, I guess we'll find out. So, that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you made it this far, you are awesome. And yeah, thank you for stopping in, and thank you for the support. Like, literally, like, everybody, I'm glad that you love Fractured Stories. I love Fractured Stories, and you know what? We're back on the train. It's a very small train. It's a tiny train, and I'm the only one conducting it right now. But, you know what? That's okay. That's totally fine, and let's get this fun train a-rolling, shall we? But I appreciate all the support up to this point. All of you have just been awesome, so thank you. And, alright, I think that's about it. You know that usual fun stuff that YouTube likes. A like and sub if you feel so inclined. You'll see way more Fractured Stories in the future. Other story stuff. And I also stream games. I also stream on this channel as well. So come by to chat sometime. People here are pretty cool. And that's about it. See you in the next episode. Stay awesome. This was a good friend at Musical Pumpkin, watching over your pumpkin patch. And from us at Musical Pumpkin Studios, stay dope.